You have all the power and all the beginnings to our endings, God, and the endings to our beginnings, God. Every piece of it is yours, Lord. And I just pray and lift you up tonight. And I pray these voices that have gathered together, these hearts that have gathered together in this little church on a Wednesday night, Lord, will reach up to heaven, God, and will please you, God. And I pray that somehow, Lord, we could shake this area, God, for you. In some way, we could tell people more about you. We could get bolder with our faith. We could get bolder with our message as the new year comes along. And we could just make a name for you, God, in this area, God. That we would see things done that we've never seen done, God. That we would see breakthroughs that we've never seen, God. All the great foundations that have been built are ready for this house to come to be in, Lord. There's been people here for years before I was here that laid the stones and laid the foundation for what's to come, God. And I pray you would bring it, Lord. I pray you would speak, you would build a house for your name, God. You would build more people for your name, God. And I thank you for what you're doing, and I thank you for what you've done too, Lord. And I give you all the praise and all the glory and all the honor. In your name I pray. Amen. Amen. Let's give the Lord a hand. Please, you can be dismissed. Adults, you can be seated. Kids, you can be dismissed. Try not to dismiss the adults this time. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to John chapter 1. John chapter 1. John chapter 1 is where we're going to be tonight, for the most part. I don't think I can ever stick completely to one place. Maybe there is one. I like to use other verses to back up kind of what I'm showing you. So we're talking about Christmas according to John. And you may say, well, what does that make any different than any other part of the Bible? Well, it's the only gospel where it's not told exactly like it is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You have to really look for the story of Christmas if you want to find it. The book of John is written, what we believe, in 90 AD, somewhere around that time. So it's 90 years AD. So John was probably the last gospel written in a view of what the previous three had already written about Jesus. So he could look at what they had written and go, well, they didn't say this. And he had probably read all three of them. And he could say, well, they didn't say this, they didn't say that. And he's an old man, probably by this time, and he is looking back on his life and saying, well, if I'm going to write it, I need to write it now because I can't have a lot of years left. And so he wanted to make sure that what he told about Jesus was a little bit different than all the rest of them. He does refer to himself as the disciple Jesus loved in that book. We believe that John written it because he writes that it was a first-person account, and it was of the disciple that Jesus loved. So we believe it to be John. It's like some other letters that John had written. John is different from the other three in the fact that it's more poetic. So you say, well, it's a little bit different in the fact that it's more poetic. And it says, while all the other Gospels tell of what happened to Jesus, John tells of what those things happening mean. It's kind of it's different in the others say, oh, in Luke chapter 2, where unto us a child is born, and his name shall, we look at all these things, and Jesus is born, and we say, why? But why is he born? And John goes a little bit further than that. He doesn't start at the birth. He starts at the beginning of time. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he, being Jesus, was with him even in the beginning, even before he was born. And we go, well, how does that be? It's because we look at things as having a beginning and an end, but in Jesus, things just are consistent. They go all the way around. There is no beginning and end. We may only know beginning and end. I talked to Doug the other night, and I was telling Doug, I said, I only understand beginning and end because that's all I know. I don't know how Jesus has always been. If you come and you ask me that question, I'm going to tell you that I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't think there's anybody out there that understands that. But what I do know is that Jesus has always been. In the book of John, at the time it's believed that John is writing this version of events that will become the gospel, that he is looking back and not forward. And sometimes life is lived looking forward, but it's learned looking back. And he says what? He says, I want to tell everything I can about Jesus before I die. Because not only is John one of his disciples, but John was with Jesus' mother when Jesus was on the cross. You don't get any closer than that. And he probably can call himself the one Jesus loved because he was there with his mother. I mean, if you're there with my mother and I was hanging on the cross, I would think pretty highly of it. Think pretty highly of the people who come and sit in the waiting room with my parents when I have my surgery. I mean, if you write a book one day and you were there, you can write it as the one that Jesus loved. Or one that Matt loved, excuse me. So John chooses to represent Christ he chooses to represent him more as a deity. He wants to prove the Godship of Jesus. And that's what his story begins with, the story of how Jesus was God and how Jesus was man. And he wanted to show the correlation between the two. If you have your Bibles, John chapter 1, we're going to look at 1 through 18. And here it goes. If you don't have it, you can follow along. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was with God in the beginning. So that tells me when God was walking with Adam and Eve in the coolness of the day, or he would come down and he would spend time with Adam in the coolness of the day, that Jesus was there. That's what it said. He was with him in the beginning. I don't know when the beginning is, but it was before Adam. And so, if we go forward, through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And there was a man sent from God, whose name was John. And he came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. In verse 7, when it says he came to testify, look, if we flash forward to Revelation, what does Revelation say? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony. He came to testify of who and what Jesus had done. He was overcoming evil with his good just by his testimony and through his testimony. And you say, well, how important are words? Well, they're very important when they dictate what your life has done or what somebody's life has done. It's so good. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. I love that John clears himself of any kind of taking any credit right there. He says, me, I'm not the light. I only came as the light. I only came to tell of the light. And the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And we say, well, what is John's story of Christmas? It is about the entrance of the God into society. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Well, how was he coming? As a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. Well, how do we know that? We know that from the other three Gospels. But John agrees with him. He says he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. And he came to that which was his own, but his own didn't receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or husband's will, but born of God. And I think this is John's theme, is right here. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Why is he called the Word? It's because he lives. It lives through him. It comes out of him. It emits from him. It is him. When we pick up the Bible and we hold it up, he was the living Word. He had these things in him, just like cover to cover. It holds the words of God. In him was the God. And in him was the words of God. And it says the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And it says, John testified concerning him. He cried out saying, this is the one I spoke about when I said, he who comes after me, because he was before me. This is John the Baptist talking. He said, because he comes before me, he has surpassed me already. And out of his fullness we have received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, and grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So we knew what to do, but Jesus came to give you grace and to show you the way to do it. And no one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who himself is God and is in the closer relationship with the Father, has made him known. And right here we see the separation of the Trinity and the fact that we see the God, the Father, and God the Son. And eventually, at the end, we see God the Holy Spirit. Okay? Verse 14 states what? It says, the Word became flesh. The Word became flesh. This message of Christmas is the Christ of the Word, or Christ, or the Word, became flesh and dwelt among us. Because Jesus is God in human flesh. He's 100% man. So when he hits his old hand with a hammer, he still feels it, just like you and I do. That he's 100% God too. Could he took himself off the cross? Yes. Did he? No. He's 100% man, but he's 100% God. John wants us to know that God became man and dwelt among us. That's his story of Christmas, is that a God would step out of heaven and get into the manger of a baby. It's pretty powerful when you think about it. John's message is on the deity of Christ, or the Godship of Christ. Jesus is the why of Christmas, and he is the why of Christmas. So we have, okay, think about the wise men. You have the wise men. You have the shepherds who are out in the field keeping sheep. You have Mary. You have Joseph. I would consider these all to be supporting cast of really what's going on. Without them, it's not as good of a story, but Jesus is the main character. He is the one. So all these rest are supporting cast of who has come to make his statement on the world. And it says, why? So why do we have wise men? Why do we have the kings? Why do we have the manger? Why do we even have Mary and Joseph? Because it's here to usher in the hero of the story. The hero of the story. You know what? I thought about myself at Christmas, and I thought, you know what? I just don't celebrate the hero like I should. I don't, all these things can be distractions for me. There's a lot going on this time of year. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of things vying for my attention. There's presents, there's parties, there's parades, there's all these things that are vying for my attention. But I must focus for a little while on the hero of the story. He is the most important thing. And I think to get satisfaction that I believe that God has revealed to me, he said, just keep pointing it back to me. Just keep pointing it back to me. Don't let it get pointed elsewhere. Let it point back to me. What I tell you one time, you'll hit wherever you aim at. And this Christmas is the same way. If you aim for Jesus, you will hit Jesus. But if you say you're aiming for Jesus and you really aim for other things, you will hit other things. All the time longing to hit that one target that's right down the middle, and it's Jesus. It says, that is, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all acknowledge the beginning of Jesus' life at his birth. But John, however, takes Jesus' beginning back to the vast realm of eternity. In the beginning, the hero, or Jesus, makes entry into the world because he doesn't want to leave us alone. He could, but he wants to save us. Let me show you John 1:11 through 13. If we look back at that, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. He came to them, they didn't come to him. Verse 12, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural sin, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. This hero came on scene at Christmas. It became Christmas because he wanted to save the world. If we look at John, if we flip forward, if you have your Bibles and you want to flip forward to chapter 3, verse 17, it says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. That was God's message, was, I'm going to save the world. How can I save them? I can send them a piece of me. Think about it. He said, I can send them myself. I can send a part of me. I can send them Jesus, and he will ultimately be their saving grace. John represents Jesus as the hero come to save all humanity. I think that's what I like about John. Is John talks about him so personally. And not to say that the other gospels are wrong or bad. They all have their place. But I love how John is so personal. And so in order to save humankind, he dwelt among them, and then he became one of them. Look, 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. In other words, Jesus said, how can I save them? Well, I can give them someone with skin on. It's like that old story. It's the kid who comes down from his bed at night. He's scared. I mean, if you're a dad or your mom, you know what it's like experience? And you have a minute of peace after they're supposed to be in bed, and the little boy says, can somebody come up with me? And they're like, get you a drink of water, go back to bed. And he goes back to bed, and he lays there, and it's dark, and it's quiet. Imagine that. And he gets scared, and he comes back down again, and he comes back down, and he says, oh, I'm scared. And they're like, well, ask Jesus just to lay down beside you, ask him to be there with you. And he says, okay. And he goes back upstairs, and he lays there, and it's quiet, and it's dark again. And he says, Jesus be with you, but he's still scared. I'm in there. And so he says, and he runs back downstairs, and he gets downstairs, and he looks at his mom and dad, and he says, listen, I'm scared. And I said, just pray that Jesus will lay down beside you. And he's like, all right. And he goes up to his room, he doesn't want to do it, and he gets up and he lays down in his bed, and he's like, Jesus, just lay down beside me. But he's still scared. And so he comes downstairs, and they're like, what do you want? Because, it's been like 4 times now, and good grief, that would get on everybody's nerves. And he makes this, he's like, I'm scared. And they're like, ask Jesus to lay down. He says, I need somebody with skin on. I need that warmth. And I think that God, even though he had spoken so directly so many times, that the world needed somebody with skin on. The world needed somebody with skin on. They needed someone to come beside them, to walk amongst them, and to be with them. And it was a mission of love that God the Father took a part of him, which had been with him from the beginning, and gave it for man. If we look back at John 1:1, it describes where he had been from the beginning. John 1:1 and John 1:2. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He, Jesus, was with God in the beginning. Can you imagine? There had never been a point where the Father and the Son did not be together. It kind of, it's weird at my house, just when we send Elijah to camp, and he's not there at our house, and he's only been with us, the 28th, this month, he'll be with us 13 years, and it's just different when he's not there. So I can't imagine for God, what it was like when he sent Jesus to earth, and for that, even on the cross, for that brief moment, it says that God turned his back, and for that once, Jesus was holy. He was the only person who was ever alone in one place. God just turned his back and couldn't even look upon him anymore. And for that moment, he didn't have him, and he had always been with him. Even before he was born on earth, Jesus was. At the point where nothing existed, Jesus existed. And when the beginnings began, he already existed. It's hard for us to think about, it's hard for us to fathom, but he already existed. The testimony of Scripture is he was before all things. So God took something that had always been with him, and he gave it to man. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. It's important that he gave. He loved, and he showed it because he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. He took something that was in him, and then he did something with it. You'll have that opportunity this Christmas. There'll be things that come around. There'll be people that come around. There'll be situations that happen, and you'll have a chance to take a little bit of whatever is in you and produce it outwards. And sometimes we take what's in us and we give it outwards, and it's not a good thing, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. In our heart, sometimes it's not where it's supposed to be. So we pour out things that are in us onto people that don't deserve them, that don't need them. And even if they're ugly to you, you're only in charge of you, right? So we pour out those things on them. So why not put as many good things in us as we can, and then when those opportunities arise, we pour out good things on people this Christmas season. It'll get hustle and bustle. It'll get wild. My schedule this week is wild. Every day is wild, like all the way through Sunday, and then I got to speak somewhere Tuesday night, and then I'm back here. It's wild right now. Me and April said, there'll have to be some time that we spend together. And she looked at me and she said, but it can't be this week. And I'm like, you're right. Hey, how you doing? Let's go to sleep. Let's go to work. Let's start again. Some of you know what that's like. But what I will say is, if you don't make time for the things that are important in your life this Christmas season, they'll be past you. And it'll be another one that you come in. And I'll preach a little bit Sunday about an Iowa Christmas, IDLE, and an Iowa Christmas, IDOL. And we'll talk about, a little later here. And we'll talk about how sometimes we can just experience Christmas by being idle. And sometimes there's so many other things that take our attention, it might as well be ours in our life. And we'll talk about some of those things. And it says here that Jesus, he became flesh. He lowered himself to make himself physically equal with us. So he became to where we were, to stand in our place and accept our punishment for sin. And that's why it says, he who knew no sin became it, so that we could become like him. So he who knew no sin was in heaven. He was this great, glorious God. He's always been great, but he came and he became a man. He had to lower himself to be that. And it says that he took on sin. Why? So you could get rid of yours and you could go be with him. There's an exchange happening with us right now even. Is we're giving our sin, and Christ has forgiven our sin, and he has paid the price for our sin, and so there we can go be like him, and we can be with him. And it says so right here, he who knew no sin became it, so we can become the righteousness of God. It's the mission statement. It's how things were meant to be at this point. When I think about Jesus, in him, John says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. In him was life. Jesus didn't simply come for the Jews. John is a Jew, and he's looking back, and he's realizing that Jesus didn't just come for us Jews. He didn't come for everybody that's like me. He came for the people that's not like me. And you know what? We could do a little better than that in church. He came for the people that's like us, and he came for the people that's not like us. And you know what? That's what John is realizing as he looks back on things, is that Jesus came as the light for all mankind. So the person that disgusts you to no end, you have to admit that you say, you know what? That Jesus came and gave his life even for that person. The person that's nasty. The person that's completely clean. The person that looks like they've got it all together are the people that sometimes don't have it together. The people who's got it all figured out and the people who don't. And Jesus didn't simply come for the Jews, but he came for all. And at the time, John, being in Israel, he would have thought that, that they came for him, just him. But he says, no, they came for all men. And John even understood as a Jew himself that Jesus' mission was bigger than the Jews. He actually came that all men might have life. It's bigger than just John's reality. A light for all mankind. And the light that shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So no matter what you're going through, no matter how dark the situation, no matter how deep the situation gets, we know that there is a light, and the light's overcome the darkness, and it doesn't matter how dark my day gets, because he has overcome the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And you know what? Every time it gets dark, and every time it gets difficult in our house, we ought to say these things. You know what? I mean, it's hard right now. We will all agree. But you know what? The darkness has not overcome our light. It's good news. John, the old man, he writes back, he's looking back, hindsight is 20/20, right? And he says, everything has tried to snuff out the light. Think about, those Herod, and he killed all the babies, and he tried to snuff out the light. He couldn't. And there were all these things. There were kings that had came, and even the death of Jesus, but nobody could snuff out the light. It was a light that shines in darkness, and darkness has not overcome it. There's a problem. And people we cannot control, and bad times we cannot control, and sickness, good grief. I wish I could control it right now. There's a lot of it. And disease. But the good news still stands is that the light shines in darkness does not overcome it. Christmas may get crazy this year. It may go wild. Things may happen that I don't like. Things may happen that I love. But you know what? There's a light that's consistent, and it always shines, and it's not overcome by the things that come against it. He was a light for all men. Sure, the thought was he came for the Jews, but he came to save us all. John 1:4, in him was the light, and the light was the light, not for just the people I think and choose, but for all mankind. And he had a light in him. He doesn't receive it from someone else, but we receive it from him. And him was life, and his life was the light for all men. In other words, he didn't get it from somewhere else. It actually came from who he was. That's the truth, is that light emitted from him. He had no shadows, because in the presence of light that comes from inside of you, there is no shadow, right? The shadow is when light is projected onto something and it blocks some of the light. But if the light's emitting from 100% of every orifice of your body, every place of your body, if it's all coming out and it's all light, and this is who Jesus is, it means that in him there is no darkness. In other words, there is no shadow. And I like that kind of light. It says that so what does Jesus say? If we look a little further into John 14:6, Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. In other words, I am the portal. I am the gateway. There'll be a bunch of things. But if you want to be exact, if you want to get to the Father, I'm not being open-minded. I'm not being closed-minded. I'm being specific. I can't tell you how to get to Ohatchee just by saying go some direction and you may end up there. No, I'll give you directions, and that's what Jesus is doing this way. Doing right here. He's saying, I am that way. If you want to know the Father, come to me. Know me and be like me. And I will get you to the Father. So Jesus, again, in this book of John, he points out that he is the light and he is the gateway to the Father. If you look at all the signs Jesus coming is long foretold in the Bible. Years and years. Randy, I love what Randy talks about when we do the candlelight service every year. And he talks about, for hundreds of years there was no light. There was no mention of Jesus. Malachi mentions him, and then after Malachi mentions, I think 500 years pass. It's hundreds of years past before Christ arrives on the scene. And during that time, there's just this total darkness. But what I know from that is I know that at a minimum of hundreds of years before Christ came, people talk about him coming. How could you know somebody was coming? How could you be so specific unless he was meant to be God? Can you imagine predicting something 500 years ago? It would be so different than what now is. I can't imagine somebody predicting there'll be a guy that stands in the church and he tells you about John and his story, what is John's idea of Christmas, and it was told 500 years ago before I came. Not long. But here we see the deity of Christ in the fact that he was predicted. I found an item while preparing today that said 55 Old Testament prophecies, some going back all the way to Genesis, that foretold of when Jesus comes. 55 Old Testament prophecies, long before Jesus had come about. It's not an accident. When the prophet Malachi stepped off the earthly stage around 450 BC, no genuine prophetic voice was heard again for about 500 years. There was some prophesying 500 years early about Jesus and more. It's not some hokey story. It's actually some holy story. John says it when he says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He said what everyone had read about and thought about now actually stood with them. So here they had heard about these prophecies. They knew the prophecies. The Jews did. The Jews knew the prophetic word that one day, hundreds of years prior, they read these words. And now what they had read about in the prophecies was fulfilled in the person of Jesus. And I think it was so unreal that a lot of them just didn't believe it. They looked at it and they couldn't believe it. And it was crazy enough that the people fishing down that were catching the fish, they're the ones that believed it. And they said, we'll follow you wherever you want to go. It was the people that nobody expected. They become the people that we're still talking about. When I look at the story of Jesus, and people tell me, they say, well, I don't believe in Jesus, or I don't believe in God. And there's these things that I think, well, what made you so smart? It's like, it'd be like my phone saying, I don't believe in you. I built my phone, It's kind of one of those things. It's like, what if you're designed to only understand this much? The Godhead lives outside of what your little brain, which only uses a percentage of what it can. What if God lives outside? But yeah, you're so smart that you understand. What does he have to do? He came to earth and raised people from the dead. Nobody else did that. That wasn't something that was common. He walked on water. To my knowledge, there wasn't a lot of people walking on water. I don't know if you've ever tried to walk on water. Maybe you had some. Yeah, if what more does he have to do? He does miracle after miracle. I mean, even something as simple as turning water into wine. It's probably one of the simplest of the miracles, yet it was the first miracle, and yet he did it because his mother asked him, and I don't know any of you who can do that. If it was so simple. It's like, what more does he have to do? Then he goes, okay, well, I'm gonna raise from the dead. And I'm going to come back to life. I'm going to die. I'm going to be in the grave for 3 days. And I'm going to come out. And multiple people, hundreds of people maybe, even saw Jesus alive after he had done been dead. But yet somehow he's come to God. So what I'm saying is when Christmas comes along this year, that if we look at what John says, it's not the things that we do and we celebrate that are Christmas. It's what's already been done for you. When it says he is the reason for the season, that all the other things should support him. In other words, everything in my celebration should go back to him. He is the reason for the season. I can't say he's the reason for the season and yet never talk about him. And never have him in my home. And never talk to my kids about him. And never point to him and do the things and go directly toward him. It's like saying, okay, there, Stephen's the target, but I'm shooting over here. I'm trying to hit Stephen. It's like, oh, Christmas, he is the reason for the season. We have all these great things that we say, but you know what? The things that we do matter so much more than the things that we say. Amen. And so I'm going to have to figure out Christmas, and I'm going to have to think about Christmas in a way where he is always the number one thing. Because why? Because he became flesh and dwelt among us. I think that may be the greatest story of all of it. I love the how. I love that he got in, that he was a baby in a manger. I love knowing all the background story, but I want to know the why. And it's so he could save us. And so he could so it was the hero. Not only did he become flesh and dwelt among us, he became sin to free us from it. And he took these things on by allowing them in him, not simply approaching him. Can you imagine? It's not, when somebody touches you or somebody comes against you, it's one thing, but it's another thing to take something on and for it to be you. And so he took on sin and he took on humanity and he said, I'll become these things so that you can be free of them. I don't know how to explain that in a clear way to understand that fully. But you know what? I don't think I could understand humanity if I'd never been human. So Jesus comes and he says, you know what? You won't understand me till I become like you. So he takes us on. And it says, when you allow something to touch you, you allow something that affects you directly and invades you intimately. He could have stayed away. He could have just revealed himself in a certain way. He could have stayed away and kept and revealed himself to us. Think about, he did reveal himself to us in the burning bush, right? He could have just kept doing things like that. But no, he said, I'm going to become you. So that you'll believe that when you hurt, I've already hurt. So that when you have dark days, I've had dark days. He could have made himself a king, but he didn't. He made himself lowest, pretty low, pretty common. His dad's name is Joseph, pretty common name. His mother's name is Mary, pretty common name. I mean, if you look back on the historical record, it's pretty common. He could have been a king, but he didn't. He said, I'll become a commoner. And he could have stayed away and just revealed himself, but he didn't. He came and became one of us. And Jesus has walked where you walk, and when he became human, and he became you, and he experienced total loss to know you. And Jesus, in other words, he went all in for you. And I think that's what John shows us, is that Jesus would become flesh, and he would go all in for you. And John testifies of it because he saw it firsthand. And he believed it enough by seeing it firsthand that he would risk himself and he would be at the cross with Jesus' mother. He was in danger. They were looking for people that were part of the way. They were looking for people that were part of Jesus. And he had been with them the whole time. And he may even have been, we believe he may be the youngest. But at the same time that John is going out and he's doing these things, he's going out fearlessly. Why? Because he believed in what he saw. And so, you have John, who was the disciple at the cross. He was with Jesus' mother at the cross. And he saw the whole story and did not want to tell the side of the story that the other Gospels told. And so he told Christmas this way. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Because he saw it firsthand and believed. And I think that's why John tells a little bit different story than the other Gospels. I think the other Gospels are great. They're historical accounts. They have great things in them. There's things that are supported across all of them. But in John, he doesn't bother with the things that are already told as much as he bothers with what he saw and what he lived. So I wanted to give you another part of it. There's some more teachings out